Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process and for authors to learn valuable tips on producing and marketing your audiobooks. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today. There is a lot of noise and a lot of legal maneuvering and trying to figure things out in this realm of AI narration for audiobooks. There are a lot of different ways that AI can create an audio version of a book, and there are lots of debates about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So let's jump in. You may be aware, if you have been a follower of my podcast, that I do have very strong opinions about this question of whether AI, or artificial intelligence, should be in the narrator booth, if you will. I am also very passionate about considering any aspect of an audiobook, especially the production, in terms of the listener experience and trying to make that the very best that it could possibly be. There are many reasons for that, not the least of which is that when you, as a customer, listen to a truly great audiobook, you generally tell your friends. And that word of mouth is one of the key factors that audiobook listeners have identified as one of the main reasons why they will choose a particular audiobook for their next listen. So it behooves you as an author to make sure that you are creating that really excellent listening experience. There is also some information, data that has come in from Edison Research in a study that they have conducted about audiobooks and their listeners that lets us know that about 60%, 59 to 60% of listeners will stop if they don't like the narrator. And that 64% say that the quality of the narrator is key to enjoying an audiobook. Now, let's talk just a little bit about what can be lost by having an audiobook that is not great, that maybe is mediocre or worse. And I'm going to share an experience that I had as an audiobook customer, a listener. I got this audiobook. I'd gotten one that I really enjoyed by an author. It's a very well-known author. And I really enjoyed it. The narrator did such a great job. So I immediately went to find another of this author's audiobooks. Got it and started listening. And it wasn't too far into it before I just couldn't take it any longer. And I stopped. I stopped because it felt to me like no matter how hard I tried to understand and hear the story in spite of the narrator, that I couldn't. The narrator's work was actually getting in the way. All right. So my experience, and I know that I'm not alone in this because I've talked to a lot of people. My experience was then I did not go look for another one of that author's audiobooks, even though I'd had a good experience with the first one, because what I learned with the second one was that her or her publisher's choices, attention to the casting of the project were not good. They were inconsistent at best. And so she, or the publisher, they lost my trust in terms of me being able to buy one of those audiobooks and to have a good experience. And, I spent good money on that audiobook, and it really bummed me out that I wasn't going to be able to enjoy it. So that's just one example of what can happen. The loss of a potential follower if you have a poor quality audiobook out there. Another thing is that You can have that word of mouth that I mentioned earlier that makes a huge difference in terms of the positive quality of recommending an audiobook to friends. You can have the exact opposite as well. You can hear, as I have shared, that this is not worth buying. This audiobook is not worth it. Or just more likely, just not mentioning it at all to anybody because you didn't have a good experience. So you can lose followers who are not likely to then go spend more money on your content on the chance that maybe they'll just enjoy it better in a different format. Now, they might, but I'm just suggesting to you, and from my own experience as a customer, sharing that more often you're going to just lose a follower. That's not a good approach to the work. We always, in whatever aspect we're in of the production, the publishing of content, we want to make sure, first of all, it's well written, that it's well edited, and for an audiobook, that it is well recorded and well engineered. These are critical factors to the success of your audiobook. Okay, now the focus of this episode is on AI narration versus just selecting a good narrator. And it's true that there are lots of narrators who really shouldn't be narrating audiobooks. Maybe they should be doing other voiceover work. I'm not going to speak to that, and it's going to vary person by person. But there are many people who just really want to be an audiobook narrator, and sadly, they're not up to the task. They're not up to the quality that's needed. What they need to do is to get training and practice. It takes a lot of work to develop the skills to be a great narrator. So if in your mind you're saying, and I've heard this actually argued, is that, well, AI is better than some narrators. Okay, but is AI great at the job that you're setting it to? And is it appropriate for AI to be doing this task? It would be akin to saying, well, this book over here is so poorly written that mine will look good next to it. Is that the measure? No, it should not be the measure. You want to look at the great books and then compare your work with the great books. And can it measure up? Can it be even better? How can you achieve that greatness in your work? Well, again, whether it's the writing, the editing, whatever aspect of the process that you're in. One of the other arguments for AI narration, and I think the biggest argument really, is, well, it is so much cheaper to do it with AI narration, because the truth is that to have a human narrator, a good quality, skilled human narrator to record your audiobook is, yes, an expensive process. It is. I acknowledge that. And I also recognize that not everyone has the budget to do that. But I am still going to come back to that argument of, is it worth potentially losing your followers to produce an audiobook that is subpar? And I would answer that for myself, and I hope you would answer it this way too, that it is not worth that. I would say if you cannot afford in any way to have an audiobook produced, and there are many ways to do it that do not cost an arm and a leg, but if you cannot afford to do it in any way, then just don't do it. Don't have an audiobook version. That's okay. Not every book has to be an audio. And some authors will take on the task themselves as a way to save money. Sometimes that can be a good choice. Sometimes that's not a good choice. It's all going to depend on how skilled you are at audiobook narration, or how quickly you can develop those skills so that you can do the excellent job that you need to do to have your audiobook be great. Let's just take a short pause, and then we're going to come back and talk about some of the different types of AI narration that are out there, just so you understand how they're created, and another approach to making it affordable. So let's take this short break. We'll be right back. Would you like to earn more from your audiobook sales? If you're an author with an audiobook, you may have noticed that royalties from Audible especially, and other platforms as well, are frankly kinda pathetically low, disappointingly low, and unfairly low considering what it cost you in effort and resources to create it. How is it the retailers are the ones making all the money off your work and investment? As someone who started in the audiobook industry in 1981, I've found it frustrating that authors keep getting shortchanged. The good news is that Pro Audio Voices just launched Amplify Audiobooks, a direct sale audiobook platform for authors that puts you back in the driver's seat. Earn 65% of the gross sales price that you set. Compare that to the percentage of the percentage that retailers give. Run promotions on schedule whenever you want. Create coupon codes. Build community with your customers, since you'll know who they are and how to contact them. Work with a caring, responsive, supportive team to help you succeed all along the way. Get help with marketing. Get paid weekly. We're helping audiobook authors who are frustrated by painfully low royalties and the barriers that prevent them from managing their own products and customers. Amplify Audiobooks is a direct sale platform that enables authors to earn much higher royalties and have way more control. We're disrupting the audiobook industry by putting authors first. Get started today at proaudiovoices.app or go to proaudiovoices.com and click on the Distribution Amplify link. Join the movement. Okay, there are a couple different ways that AI voices are generated. One is that the computer will take samples of many different voices and mash them together to create a new voice from this conglomerate of voices. With this version of AI, there is no one particular human being whose voice is being replicated. They are actually creating a new voice from a mix of many voices. And this has lots of legal questions surrounding it, and lots of there are cases being litigated and people trying to figure out how to even regulate this, because certainly in the very beginning of this process, when companies were creating these new voices, in essence, they were taking people's recorded voices without permission, and that's the real issue. So there's a lot of legal questions around that. The other version also has plenty of legal questions around it, and that is that they will sample somebody's voice and then use that sample to manipulate it so that it will modulate itself to create the sounds of the words that the text has. So it's all based on one particular person's voice, and then the idea is that it sounds like that person would sound. Now, there are also, as I say, legal implications around this. Some narrators have opted in to have this happen and have their voices be made available and are compensated something for that usage. This can potentially be useful in a scenario where, let's say, for example, the narrator becomes quite ill. They may have recorded an audiobook and then a correction needs to be made, but they got COVID or some other thing that has affected their voice. And if they had a sample, then maybe they could do that one little correction and make it sound close enough to them that it will work for the listener. But in any case, there are these couple different ways that AI voices are being generated. So I just wanted you to understand that there are these different ways. And then in either case, one of the things that they're trying to train their AI to be successful with is more nuance and more emotion. And here's where one of the areas where I think that AI is unlikely to succeed. And then I'll go into other reasons why I just don't think AI should be narrating anyway. We humans are complex and interesting and nuanced. And we, as writers even, will write something where we have our characters maybe say something but the emotion underneath it is different than what is obvious on top. There is so much, again, it feels like nuance is the best word, really, but emotional nuance that I just certainly am not hearing at this stage in AI narration. And I don't think personally that it is going to get there. Now, that's not to say that it's not going to fool some people and convince some people. Okay? I get that is probably the case, that people will be deceived into thinking it's a real human. But philosophically, I am a strong believer that audiobook narration, that sharing of story orally, is so much more than just a recitation of words. And that there is something, call it spiritual, call it whatever you want, something mystical, magical, something very special about the human connection between the speaker, the human speaker who speaks into the mic, and crossing boundaries of time and space, the human listening to that narration at some other time in some other place. That connection has something very unique and special about it. And relegating that experience to a computer that is just imitating what humans sound like as best it can, I don't think is giving our listeners the best of what audiobooks can be. As I said, I am a huge believer in creating the very best listening experience. And I don't think that any computer is going to be able to take on that role and deliver the best experience for the listeners. The other aspect, the more practical, if you will, aspect of why I don't think computers should be narrating audiobooks is that we, as a community of creators, and I'm talking about authors, I'm talking about narrators, I'm talking about all the people in the creative process, we need each other. What is it that we value most? Isn't it that human connection rather than how much something cost? Isn't it the experience of working together collaboratively with a team to be able to create this experience that then is shared with our customers? Isn't that what matters? Now, I totally get that AI has a place in our world, and it provides some valuable services, and it is a great resource in many arenas. I just don't think that it is properly used to write books and to narrate books or to create art for us. Art is a form of human expression. Have we forgotten the human part of that expression? Again, it comes back to that communication from one human to another. And there are many ways and means and medias in which we work to be able to have that kind of shared communication, human to human. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is how using a human narrator can be a proper, appropriate, successful investment. Back when BookBub announced that they were partnering with the AI narration system to be able to provide AI audiobooks, wasn't that great because it's going to cost authors so much less. And according to them, that would mean it would be easier to get a return on your investment. Well, we were looking at that exact same problem of it being hard for authors to get a return on their audiobook investment, but we approached it with a very different lens. Because there is, in my opinion, a problem in the majority of the audiobook industry, and that is that the authors or the rights holders are receiving far too little of the revenue generated by audiobooks, that they're getting far too little of what should be their fair share. So they're not getting their fair share. And that really, I see, is the main problem. Because if you know you're going to get a return on your investment, then it's really just a short-term cash flow situation to be able to get the money to be able to then produce the audiobook. But most authors are coming into the audiobook production arena, that the question of whether they should do that with the acceptance of the notion that they're not going to be able to get a return on their investment, but it's still important to them. The other big challenge, of course, that authors generally face is that they have no tools with which to really promote and market their audiobooks, because the audiobook retailers in general don't provide them with any controls. They can't run a promotion. They can't do discount codes. They don't know who bought their audiobook. There are so many things that they have no control over, including their standard price. You can suggest a price, but, each retailer gets to decide what they're going to sell it for. So looking at that problem, again, looking through a different lens, we created Amplify Audiobooks, a platform which is a direct sale platform that authors can sell their audiobooks through and provide a store context and a store experience, an app that goes with it so listeners can have a great user experience. And there's a lot more actually coming soon this year that will be added to that Amplify Audiobooks platform, both for authors and then also for listeners. The reason and the way in which this turns that whole question of investment and return on investment on its head is that when you sell through Amplify Audiobooks, you have to sell only about a third or a quarter of as many as you would if you sold them on Audible, right? Okay, so Audible's the biggest platform. They have the biggest market share. I get that. But this assumption that many come to me with that, everybody's going to buy it on Audible, is not true. It's just not true. And in fact, there are a growing number of people, and I count myself among them, who choose not to patronize the Amazon ecosystem. Now, I get that as a consumer, Amazon has made it very easy to do a lot of things, to buy a lot of things. I'm just focused on audiobooks right now. And even though I personally will choose whenever I can, if I need something, to not buy it on Amazon, I'll buy it somewhere else. But when it comes to audiobooks, there are so many options. And there are options that will help support the creators and make it possible for them to thrive. And isn't that what we want? Don't we want a thriving community of creators so that we can have more content, more great books? Isn't that what we want? I say yes. And so Amplify Audiobooks is the solution that we as audiobook customers can do that, and have that impact and be able to support that community of authors. And as authors, using that platform is a way that we can then get the return on our investment that we hope for, that we desire, and that will allow us to do more creative work. So, as we wrap this up, what I want to sum up is that considering using AI for narrating your audiobook may be cheaper, but it's not better. And when it comes to producing your audiobook, you always want to choose the best choice. And if you're looking at that as the cost of human narration, and you're considering that maybe AI is what you need to do because you don't have a very big budget, then I encourage you to meet with us at Pro Audio Voices. Let's have the conversation. You may find that there is a path for you to have a human narrator and to be able to have a great audiobook and get a return and a profit on your investment. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I would love to hear your comments. You can email me at AC for Audiobook Connection at proaudiovoices.com. I would love to hear your questions. I'd love to hear your comments. And if the platform where you're listening to this podcast will host comments, please leave a comment. And if you haven't yet rated the podcast, I would ask that you do that. So lots of different calls to action as possibilities for you. And I want to again thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.